The announcement hit like a thunderclap on a quiet Tuesday, catching nearly everyone off guard. The city was just waking up, but the news was already racing ahead, lighting up screens and conversations across the country. President Trump on Truth Social unveiled a bold new plan, what he called a $2,000 tariff dividend for millions of Americans. The post was simple, but its implications were massive, hinting at a direct payout funded by tariffs on foreign goods. The post was brief, direct, and instantly set off a firestorm. Within minutes, the message had spread far beyond his followers, ricocheting through group chats, newsrooms, and dinner tables. Phones buzzed with the news. Was it real? Could the government really send out $2,000 checks? People scrolled, searching for confirmation, as speculation and excitement grew. Trump's supporters hailed it as a masterstroke, a tangible reward and proof of his America First policies. For many, it felt like a long-awaited payoff, a sign that Trump was still fighting for the average American. Social media exploded with praise from his base. Hashtags trended, memes spread, and supporters celebrated what they saw as a bold, populist move. Critics, meanwhile, dismissed it as a desperate political stunt to distract from recent Republican losses and economic anxiety. They questioned the math, the timing, and the motives behind the announcement. The move was classic Trump. A headline-grabbing gesture that forced everyone to react, whether they liked it or not. Suddenly, every network, every pundit was talking about Trump's promise. The timing was no accident. Just days after disappointing GOP election results, when the party was searching for a new narrative and a way to rally its base. The idea of a check in the mail was universally appealing, and Trump knew its political power. For families struggling with bills, the promise of real money was impossible to ignore. Details were vague. Who would qualify? When would the money arrive? The uncertainty only fueled the frenzy, as experts and citizens alike tried to make sense of the sudden windfall. The $2,000 tariff dividend dominated cable news and kitchen table conversations nationwide. It became the question on everyone's lips, overshadowing other headlines. Trump had shifted the national focus to a single, electrifying promise. In a moment, he had changed the conversation, making himself the center of attention once again. The chaos and confusion, that was the point. In the swirl of questions and debate, one thing was clear. Trump had seized the spotlight, and the nation was left scrambling to keep up. Trump claimed the money would come from massive tariff revenues, promising a windfall for the American people. He described a system where foreign nations would be forced to pay up, and those funds would be redirected straight into the pockets of everyday Americans. The idea was simple on paper. Foreign countries would foot the bill, and Americans would reap the rewards. It was pitched as a win-win, with the U.S. government acting as a middleman, collecting money from abroad and distributing it at home. Trump said payments would target middle and lower-income Americans, specifically excluding high earners. It was framed as a modern-day Robin Hood move, taking from foreign competitors and giving to hardworking American families, a populist message designed to resonate with voters feeling left behind. But when experts looked closer, the details were vague. There were no clear income thresholds, no explanation of how eligibility would be determined, and no mention of whether children or dependents would qualify for payments. The plan's mechanics were left largely to the imagination. Economists quickly ran the numbers and found a glaring problem. The math simply didn't add up. The proposal sounded bold, but the financial reality was far less generous. Tariff revenue for 2025 was projected at just $195 billion, a figure far short of what would be needed to fund the promised payments. Sending $2,000 to every American, including children, would cost about $600 billion, over 3 times the projected revenue. The gap was enormous, and there was no clear plan to bridge it. Even if the payments were limited to those earning under $100,000, the cost would still outstrip the revenue by at least $100 billion. The numbers just didn't work, no matter how the plan was sliced. Experts from across the political spectrum called the plan a fiscal fantasy, warning that it was more campaign slogan than serious policy. The numbers were undeniable. The Treasury simply couldn't keep this promise without massive deficits or new taxes. The plan's appeal was broad, and the crowds cheered, but its foundation was shaky and riddled with unanswered questions. The lack of specifics left millions of Americans uncertain, wondering if they'd ever see a dime, or if the promise was just another political mirage. The promise sounded good, but the reality was impossible to deliver. The numbers simply didn't support the rhetoric. In the end, the so-called tariff dividend was little more than a catchy political headline, one that made waves, but couldn't withstand scrutiny as a workable policy. As the public debated the dividend, a bigger battle played out at the Supreme Court. The case, Learning Resources versus Trump, challenging whether the president could impose sweeping tariffs without Congress. The legal question, does the president have this power, or is it reserved for Congress under the Constitution? Companies argued Trump had overstepped, using emergency powers to wage unilateral trade wars. The administration insisted the president needed flexibility to act swiftly in global crises. The stakes a ruling could dismantle Trump's tariff regime or dramatically expand executive authority. During oral arguments, the Supreme Court's conservative majority showed deep skepticism, questioning the far-reaching implications of the case before them. Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Gorsuch questioned whether Congress ever meant to give the president such sweeping economic power, raising concerns about the limits of executive authority. The justices invoked the major questions doctrine, arguing that big policies need clear congressional approval, not just broad interpretations of existing law. They worried about setting a precedent for unchecked executive action, which could have lasting consequences for the balance of power. The legal ground was shifting, and Trump's tariff policy was on the brink, facing its toughest challenge yet in the nation's highest court. A glaring contradiction emerged in the administration's arguments. Publicly, Trump called tariffs a revenue machine funding the $2,000 dividend. In court, his lawyers insisted tariffs weren't taxes, but regulatory tools to pressure foreign governments. This legal distinction was crucial. Taxing is Congress's job, not the president's. The administration was trying to have it both ways, and the inconsistency was obvious. Journalists and justices quickly pointed out the contradiction. How could tariffs be both a funding source and a mere regulatory tool? The mixed messaging undermined the administration's credibility. Trump's own words became a liability, fueling legal and political chaos. The plan's legal and fiscal weaknesses were now impossible to ignore. The chaos wasn't just external. Trump's own economic team was blindsided. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent admitted he hadn't been consulted before the announcement. He scrambled to reinterpret the plan, suggesting it might be a future tax cut, not a direct payment. This contradicted Trump's promise of checks in the mail. The public split exposed deep divisions and a lack of coordination inside the White House. Economists clarified, tariffs aren't paid by foreign countries, but by American importers. And ultimately, consumers. The most direct relief: remove the tariffs altogether. The administration's internal confusion made the plan's flaws even clearer. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through Washington. In a decisive 6-3 ruling, the justices struck down President Trump's sweeping use of tariffs, declaring his actions unconstitutional. The ruling was not just a legal setback, it was a dramatic rebuke of executive overreach, and it immediately became the top story across the nation. The court's majority opinion made it clear: only Congress has the authority to impose such broad and far-reaching economic measures. The justices emphasized the importance of checks and balances, warning that allowing the president to act alone would undermine the Constitution's separation of powers. The impact was immediate and dramatic. The $2,000 tariff dividend, which millions of Americans had been counting on, was instantly dead. Its funding evaporated overnight, leaving families and businesses scrambling to adjust their plans. For President Trump and his team, the decision was a crushing blow. His economic agenda, built around aggressive trade policy and direct payments to Americans, was suddenly in jeopardy. The administration was left reeling, forced to reconsider its entire approach. The fallout was massive. Trade policy was thrown into chaos, with markets reacting in real time. Legal experts predicted a wave of lawsuits, as businesses and individuals demanded refunds for billions in unlawfully collected tariffs. The government now faced the prospect of years of costly litigation. The Treasury Department was suddenly staring down a fiscal nightmare. Billions of dollars that had been collected were now in question, and officials scrambled to assess the true scale of the financial damage. The White House faced a stark choice: work with Congress to craft new tariff laws, or let the tariffs expire and brace for even greater economic upheaval. The political stakes had never been higher. The Supreme Court had drawn a clear line on presidential power, but in doing so, it left the nation facing months, if not years, of uncertainty, instability, and fierce debate over the future of American economic policy.